Hey everyone, thanks for your support in 2024. We have a lot of cool stuff coming in 2025, and here are some of the things you can look forward to as we move into next year. In the lead up to The Mandalorian and Grogu in 2026, we'll be starting a full series rewatch of both The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett on exploring hyperspace lanes beginning in October. You can also expect a rewatch of Andor, and we will have reviews of every episode of Andor and the rest of the Skeleton Crew as those come out. Josie will be returning as we continue to rank every Star Wars thing released ever. Reviews of every episode of every Marvel Disney Plus show, including Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, The Eyes of Wakanda, Wonder Man, Ironheart, Daredevil Born Again, and Marvel Zombies, the day after each episode releases, will be available on Beware of Spoilers. We'll be having special event podcasts on 30-minute reviews for the Academy Awards, our 2024 year in review in early January, ranking all of Phase 5 of the MCU after Fantastic Four First Steps comes out, and our 10th anniversary special. Once we complete our rankings of all the Pokemon games on the backlog files, we'll be moving on to Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy. Over on the YouTube channel, you can join in for playthroughs of Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, Pokemon White, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Blue Rescue Team, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, Kingdom Hearts Recoded, Mario Golf Toadstool Tour, Sonic Adventure 2, LEGO Racers 2, LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga, and SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. Want to keep on top of all the new things we have coming? Subscribe at mwpnews.com, subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/@mwpnews, or subscribe to Beware of Spoilers, 30-minute reviews, exploring hyperspace lanes, and the backlog files on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, thank you for your support. Good morning and welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam. This week is the first of Disney's 2 live-action remakes that are coming out in theaters. We originated Lilo and Stitch. Disney originated Lilo and Stitch as a Disney Plus vehicle, but that ended up moving to theatrical. I guess it's part of a wider move by them to move away from Disney Plus as a predominant platform for that kind of thing. Because they had done some that were Disney Plus exclusive, like Pinocchio was a Disney Plus exclusive, Peter Pan and Wendy, Lady and the Tramp. So they had done a few of these that were exclusive to Disney Plus. And Lilo and Stitch is going to be one of them. They decided instead to move it theatrical. I guess they thought they would make more money on it, which is probably accurate. They probably will make more money theatrically on it. But all of that said, the first one is not Lilo and Stitch. The first one that comes out is, what's it called? The first one that comes out is, what's that movie called? Snow White. It's not Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's just Snow White. And I think that's an important distinction, because there has been a lot of negativity about that movie. We're not going to get into it here, because if you've listened to me, you know how I feel about this. I think Rachel Zegler is a fine actress, and I think she's, I think that it's something where I think this is a role she can carry. So good for her for getting this role, and I don't think the character's skin tone is necessarily the most important thing. Some people do. And that is, that's the extent of this. I don't think Gal Gadot is a good choice to play the evil queen. I think Gal Gadot is not that good of an actress, and granted, I don't think she needs to be a tremendous actress to be able to carry this movie. I mean, based on having watched this again, I don't think you need, someone to do that. But regardless, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the original. And I think the original is, I've said before, because here's the thing about the original. I watched this when I was a kid. It was never my favorite Disney movie. When I was a kid, we had this huge collection of Disney VHSs the masterpiece collection, the classics, all of that. So we had like 101 Dalmatians, we had Mary Poppins, we had all of them, basically all the Disney movies, except for like the 80s ones, but like all the classics and all the ones that came out in my lifetime we had. And I never really went in for Snow White. I was going to watch a movie with a princess in it, aside from Aladdin. One with a female protagonist. With Aladdin, Jasmine's not really a protagonist. Thinking back, it probably would have been Cinderella. Probably would have been the one that I would have put on. But if not that, it would have been like Peter Pan, or it would have been like what was the other Aladdin, Hercules, things like that. But at some point I had watched Snow White, and it never really imprinted on me as this movie that was great. And I haven't watched it in such a long time, and I wanted to rewatch it, not just for this show, but also because I was like, how does that movie end? Because there are certain touchstones from that movie I remember. Her going into the woods, her finding the dwarves, her living with the dwarves for a bit, and her eating the apple. The issue is that, the third act of this movie is not dissimilar from Sleeping Beauty, so it turns out that, in my head, I conflated the two. And I was like, I don't remember how this movie ends, because I was like, is that just Sleeping Beauty? So, rewatching the movie, I was like, oh, that's why I don't remember how this movie ends, because it just kind of does. It just kind of ends. And there's a huge historical context we take into consideration for this movie. This is not just any Disney theatrically released animated feature. This is the first. It's not just the first for Disney, it's the first, period. This was, if I remember my film history correctly, this was the first major animated feature. The first really big animated feature film. And with that, this movie almost bankrupted the Walt Disney Company, which at the time was an independent studio. It was like Disney in what was it, 1930, whatever this movie came out. At that time, Disney was not what Disney is now. Obviously, there were no parks. Obviously, there were no movies or anything like that. No IP juggernauts or anything like that. Disney was shorts, in the same way that we look back at Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers, despite the fact that you can't watch the Looney Tunes cartoons on Max anymore, that was a good amount of what Warner Brothers Animation was doing in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It was these animated shorts, these 7-minute shorts that would run as interstitials with newsreels. And because when you went to the movies, it wasn't just you watched the movie. You watched the movie, you saw a newsreel, they had a cartoon before it. Which is why if you watch those old Looney Tunes cartoons, they're not really made for kids. They're kind of made for a more mature audience. And when you watch them, it's there are references to major movies. They're those are, I would, if not for the fact that Warner Brothers took them all down, I would say those are a great kind of cultural, what's what I'm looking for here? It's a great kind of cultural time capsule for the era. And I would recommend watching them, not just for that, but there's the World War II propaganda ones that are pretty funny. Regardless. So Disney's doing the same thing, and Walt Disney himself is very ambitious. He wants to create the first feature film that's entirely animated, and there's almost entirely animated because there's the storybook in the beginning, but that's his goal here. His goal is to create this movie, and it almost bankrupts the studio. This is a very risky endeavor because it all his money went into this project. If this failed, then we wouldn't have Disney today. And how different is the film industry without Disney as this kind of constant mainstay the entire way through? Who knows? So this movie, I think there's a few things that I want to address with this. Number one, I think Snow White's role in this movie and the choice to do this story the way they do is not so much a sign of the times on how they view women as much it is the indie mindset of the 1930s. When we talk about the indie mindset, we talk about movies that come out now that are if you go to Sundance, you go to South by Southwest or Tribeca, you're going to see these independent movies that are made really cheap. The movies that early Linklater, early Robert Rodriguez, Kevin Smith, even to this day, like, these movies are made on the cheap, and in those things, they do things where it's like, we don't have the budget to do this, how can we do this without that budget? And I mean, even Star Wars, to an extent, is that indie mindset, the idea of how can we do this on the cheap, and make this look as good as possible. And here we have that. Like, they wanted to use rotoscoping for Snow White. That's clear, because they rotoscoped that character. And I think they rotoscoped the Queen. I remember seeing a documentary when I was a kid. I think it was on the Peter Pan, what's it called? I think it was on the Peter Pan VHS. Because that was the thing, is that it's like all these VHSs had these little featurettes at the end about how the movie was made, and I watched the fuck out of those too. Like, I didn't stop when the movie ended, I watched how the movie was made after too. So, like, I was that fucking dweeb even back when I was, like, 3 or 4 years old. So, I seem to recall, and again, this is going off of my memories of a VHS from almost 30 years ago, I seem to recall that the actress who did the rotoscope for Wendy was the same actress who did the rotoscope for Snow White. Or there was some commonality in that, whereas, like, she was playing Snow White in, like, the touring theater version of it, and that was and that's it. So they use rotoscoping, which for those who don't know what rotoscoping is, they would record an actress playing out the role of the character, whatever the character has to do on screen. The actress would do it, and then they would just trace it. It's kind of a primitive. I mean, this can sound dismissive, but it's a primitive version of motion capture. So all it is the actress acts it out, they have a camera rolling and all of that, which is why it's like there are times where I think she's the least good-looking character in the movie. Like, because it's like, okay, so this is clearly a human. Like, this is clearly a human who is doing, who is playing this role. So, we can't, we have to do that. Like, and the same, I think, goes for the prince, and the same goes for the evil queen in her base form. So, the idea that, all of that is kind of, happening, like, those characters are on screen so little, and I think that's by design. When we get to the dwarves and we get to the animals, they're more cartoony, more what we would think of in a contemporary sense as these are cartoon characters. They don't follow the laws of reality. They are able to contort themselves in ways because they don't look necessarily entirely human. The dwarves are human adjacent, and they definitely are mostly human. They look mostly human, but they don't look as accurate to reality and what we would expect from the human form as Snow White, the Evil Queen, and Prince Charming. So, I think that was by design, and I think that was one of those things where it's like, and when you look at what they're doing, a lot of the things they're doing is repetitive motions, and a lot of the things that they're doing are the kind of things that you would expect from those things in the beginning, like the shorts that you would see in that era. Go back, well, I mean, you can't now because Max took them all off, and I think Disney has a few, but go back and watch. I watch Lonesome Ghost on Halloween every year because I fucking love that short. But go back and watch the old Disney cartoons. These are characters that are like they're like the characters are made out of rubber. They're not like they don't look. They have bones. They don't follow anything like that. And in the same way that this is the best way to put it. They are like cousins to like Elmer Fudd or Yosemite Sam. Because to my recollection, Disney does not have many human characters who are cartoony. In that era, they would eventually do cartoony humans in their movies, but to my recollection, they don't have many. But it's not dissimilar from Elmer Fudd, from the Caveman, from the first Daffy Duck cartoon, and when they're still trying to figure out what to do with Daffy Duck, where it's like that whole thing is, you know, I think that's kind of what they're going for with these, you know, with the dwarves, is this idea that, like, okay, these are not one-to-one replications of an actual human, so we can do more with them. And again, the repetitive motion is the animator's cheat code in this, because it's like repetitive motion. You don't have to draw it twice. You can draw it once, and then you can just animate it twice. Or just retrace over and have them do the same thing again. And it's one of those things where it's like, I think that there's a reason why Snow White gets a shaft for a good amount of this movie. She doesn't have a ton to do. She is, like, and I think that that's what we're going to get into between the difference between this and the live action version, is that Snow White is a plot device in this movie. There's a reason why the movie is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because really, it's a movie about the dwarves who have this woman come into their house, civilize them, and then go out and, you know, and you know, and then kill the queen. And I think that, like, and even that's why they transition the queen at a certain point. And before they transition the queen, we don't, like, when they're in that scene where she's making the potions, it's an interesting thing where it's like they don't really show her face that much. And the reason for that is the rotoscoping. I think that the rotoscoping doesn't look as good in a movie where it's still early days of that. It's a very interesting time capsule for the medium. And I think that is kind of what makes the movie worth watching. And I think that this is a movie that, I mean, I think everyone should watch this movie at least once, even if you haven't seen it as a kid, or even go back and revisit it as an adult, especially if you're someone who wants to study the medium. Because I think it's interesting that so much of the movie is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here, watching, you know, seeing how they can adapt the things that have been working already in the Merry Melodies and the Looney Tunes. Like, that style, really that's what it is at a certain point. Like, where it's like, it's, you know, a lot of those were, if you go back and watch the old Merry Melodies, the old Looney Tunes, it was take a popular song from a movie that's coming out and do a short to sell the single. Kind of. Like, it wasn't really, like, sell the single. Like, they weren't trying to sell single records, I don't think. I'm not 100% on the full historical context. But, like, get people familiar with that song through this thing. Which is why there are if you go on to the Looney Tunes Golden Collection DVDs, I think in every set there's one where there's no Daffy Duck, there's no Bugs Bunny, there's no Elmer Fudd. It's just these that are characters you've never heard of before, characters you don't care about. They're not the famous ones. And usually when they used to, on Cartoon Network, show Looney Tunes, there'd always be a few of these mixed in. And these are the ones that I was like, all right, moving on, I don't care. I'll do something else while this 7 minutes is running. And that is it's just a popular song. It's just a popular song, and it's just them running this, you know, what's it called? It's just them playing this music, so that way when the movie comes out, you're like, oh, I've heard that before. Or when, you know, to get you familiar with the movie that's coming that's going to be featuring that song, or some musical act is performing that song, or it's like, oh, this is a big popular song of the era. Which is how you end up with, like, you know, there's a Hollywood Review one and stuff like that. The point of all of this is that a lot of the things that you kind of see there end up happening in this movie. Like, there's that whole sequence in the dwarves' house where it's after they've eaten and they're all just kind of dancing and doing that. Like, the detour they take where they have to learn how to, where it's like they have to learn how to wash. Like, that's that same kind of thing. Like, it doesn't have any plot relevance. Like, that's the thing, is that we're talking about a movie that's an hour and 20 minutes, or an hour 28. Like, that sequence doesn't have a ton to do. So, what this movie is, and what the new one has to do, is turn Snow White from inciting incident of this movie to a character with agency. Because, woman or not, it's not an interesting character. It's kind of like, there are certain, it works in this movie, and there are certain movies where it works. Like, we look back at Star Wars, and it's like, we aren't introduced to Han Solo until 40 minutes into the movie. Or is it Luke we're not introduced to until 40 minutes into the movie? Either way, it takes a long time for that movie to get going. But it's fine, because you're building out this world. This movie, it's like, if the movie is objectively about the dwarves, then it takes a long time to get to the point where we even see the dwarves. I should have clocked how far into the movie we see them the first time, because that would have been an interesting stat. How far into this movie is it that we see these characters who are, I would say more the protagonists as a collective. They're more the protagonists than Snow White is. Because Snow White kind of just shows up in their house, cleans their house, and even that, the house, Whistle While You Work, that entire sequence is a time capsule in and of itself. That feels very much like there are tons of old cartoons that are that essential thing. Animals going around doing things. Doing things in people's houses. I saw one, not too long ago, I saw one. I don't remember what studio, maybe it was MGM, but MeTV sometimes shows cartoons, and they showed one recently where it was like the animals are going in, and it's just a bunch of bugs that are having this party in the house. Or like the Bookstore Review, which is a famous Looney Tunes cartoon, where it's this idea of all the book characters come to life and have this giant party. That it is again, it's not identical, but it's not dissimilar. It's in the same general family. They're cousins of each other. Which is kind of what this is. This is a movie about finding your footing when you're doing something like this. And I think that, this is a necessary first step, and then once you get past this, you really don't have that happen too much anymore, to my recollection. Fantasia was Fantasia was a massive, a massive undertaking that's totally different. But, by the time you get to, what was the second movie? Was the second movie Pinocchio? Because I think World War II breaks out shortly after this, and the United States government conscripts Disney into making propaganda reels for Latin America, which is how you get the Three Caballeros and all of that. It's that is what was that next, or was Peter Pan next? But either way, you get these dance sequences and things like that, but they look less like that. They look less like what you would see in the animated shorts. They're doing something different then. So this is a necessary first step, but I don't. It's an interesting thing to look at. But check this movie out. I mean, look, I'm not. It's not like I'm talking about some small indie movie. I'm talking about the movie that launched the studio. A movie that, it's like, to put it in the modern parlance, it's like, go check out Machete for Robert Rodriguez. Go check out Slacker from Richard Linklater, or Before Sunrise from Richard Linklater. I don't remember which came. I think Slacker came first. Or go check out Clerks from Kevin Smith. It's that same kind of thing, but at the same time, or it's actually probably more accurately, because I think that this is the first movie that kind of sets up part of the visual language of Disney. But by the time you get to Pinocchio and Dumbo, that's where you really get Disney full in on their visual, on what they are going to look like, and what they are going to, do from here on out. But on that note, we will wrap up there for today. Our next episode will be next week. I don't remember what movie we're going to be doing next week, but we're going to be doing another movie next week. But I did, I was watching, so I was like, I really want to go back and watch the old Disney movies and track the evolution of, narrative storytelling and also animation as they go through this process of evolving, and see, what causes where we are now. But on that note, we will wrap up here for today. I think next week I don't have anything specific on the schedule because of, because of there's no movie coming out next week to tie into. I think we're going to be coming up on a rewatch of Mission Impossible. But we'll wrap up there for today. But until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.